Former President Trump did make that pit stop in the Midwest tonight. He just wrapped up his speech. In the last 10 minutes or so, he campaigned in Ohio alongside Republican Senate Candidate J.D. Vance, despite not actually being invited. Well, Niall Stanage is here, White House columnist for our partners at The Hill. And Niall, I want to jump right in with you. What's your immediate reaction to the former president's speech tonight?
Well, there's a lot of red meat here for the Republican base, particularly on topics like immigration and crime. There were some Ohio-specific references, and J.D. Vance will be grateful for that. Not a whole lot about a topic like inflation, which is top of mind for so many voters. I would say Republican candidates in general would prefer to run on inflation rather than some of the former president's false claims about rigged elections and so forth. A very Trumpian speech, for good or for bad. He did, we should say, also pick up on that comment that we were talking about earlier, Natasha, the idea that the J.D. Vance campaign had not invited him to come. He insisted that that was the case. He insisted in rather colourful language that Mr. Vance had been requesting his presence. So there's some contentiousness about that.
There is that. And, you know, we do see evidence of Republican infighting once again. He did speak about Mitch McConnell 2 times, I believe. Let's listen to one of them.
Mitch McConnell is a disgrace, and I hope you're going to do something about it, J.D. He's a disgrace. He could have stopped all of it.
So, Niall, is this good for the Republican Party?
It certainly isn't. It's not good at all to have 2 of the biggest figures in the party at loggerheads like this. It's no surprise. I mean, Mr. Trump and Senator McConnell don't like each other and haven't really liked each other at any point. I should just say, in relation to the former president branding Senator McConnell a disgrace, I tweeted out an earlier jab that Trump had taken at McConnell, and a McConnell aide by the name of Scott Jennings, former McConnell aide, I should say, someone who's worked with the Senate minority leader in his campaigns, tweeted back that a group allied with Senator McConnell has committed well over $20 million to advertising in support of J.D. Vance's campaign. As far as we know, the former president has not committed any money at all to that effort. But the mere fact that that is being highlighted on social media or anywhere else, I think is demonstrating the fact that there is this civil war really within the GOP, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think sometimes rather, what is not said is what's interesting as well. And I know, Niall, we were talking earlier about whether Trump would mention migrant buses and flights, or if that would actually risk highlighting a potential rival in 2024 in DeSantis. What did we end up seeing happening there tonight?
Well, I guess we were right to highlight that question because he didn't mention the flights or buses at all, even as he devoted a very considerable period of time to talking about migration, to linking migration with increased crime and so forth. He didn't mention what is the biggest migration-related story in the nation at the moment. And I do think it's a completely fair supposition to suggest that his reticence in that regard is to do with a dislike or distaste for highlighting people who he does see as rivals, particularly Florida's Governor DeSantis.
I want to talk about the red wave. You know, following the reversal of Roe this summer, Democrats seeing a swing in their favor, at least according to some polls. And we know that the GOP is pushing crime as a narrative. We saw this tonight leading up to the midterms. Here's actually part of what the former president had to say about that tonight.
We are going to make America great again. Our first task is to make America safe again. Right here in Ohio, our once great cities are now scenes of horror, riddled with bullet holes and soaked in blood. You know that.
So, Niall, you know, right off the bat, Trump painting such a bleak picture of our country. Is this the winning strategy to resecure a red wave, as Roe v. Wade seems to be energizing voters in a way that was initially underestimated?
So traditionally in American politics, that painting of, as you say, a bleak picture hasn't been the way to win. Of course, Mr. Trump won with it back in 2016, so that's a pretty important asterisk. But it was interesting to me the way he's trying to create some sort of connective tissue between public concerns about crime, which certainly do exist, to his own Make America Great slogan, really trying to link that into the crime issue as much as possible. As I say, there are definitely legitimate public concerns about crime, but we see, as usual with Mr. Trump, this rather lurid hyperbole. I mean, he says we know that the streets of our major cities are soaked in blood, I think was the phrase in the clip you just played. You know, do we know that? I mean, we know that there are places where crimes have ticked up. But does this very, very elevated, feverish way of talking about it help, or does that actually make those independent voters, those voters in the middle ground, somewhat discount what you're actually saying?
Yeah, that is the question. Before we go, I do want to talk a bit about the special appointment, or rather the appointment of a special master in the Trump DOJ probe. Here's his reaction to that tonight.
Now they wanted to say, let's go get this guy. They've been trying for 6 years. They haven't made it. We're not going to let it happen.
So, Niall, how much would an indictment hurt the former president? He has already said that he would still run regardless.
You know, it's a great question. I think there are people with whom it would not hurt him. We think back to the famous comment he made about how he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue in New York and people would still vote for him. As a basic statement, that is true so far as his most fervent supporters are concerned. But there are people in the Republican Party, not all of them moderates or McConnell type figures, but people who have sympathy with the former president's populism, but still worry about the amount of baggage he brings. If he were indicted, that baggage would suddenly get a lot heavier. And I think there's no question in that scenario that it would boost the standing or boost the odds of a DeSantis type figure as a Trump-ish choice without the chaos and baggage that the former president brings with him.
A Trump-ish choice. All right, Niall Stanage, I appreciate you sticking with us all evening, and as always, your insight and the context you provide. Have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.
Same to you.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.